Review Pesachim Daf Details. The Mishnah teaches us that the only parts of a gedi harach, a young gedi, which is what the Korban Pesach is brought from, the only parts that are considered basar to be yoyed to the mitzvah of achilas Korban Pesach are parts that even in a shor hagadol would be soft and edible. But parts that harden once the animal matures and it's a shor hagadol, those parts are not going to be considered basar to be yoyed to the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, even if it's a small gedi and now they're soft. The Mishnah also tells us that there are certain parts that would be able to be eaten, such as roshech nafayim and schusim, which are cartilage that do harden. The Gemara tells us that the reason why those are considered basar is because even in a shor hagadol, where these things harden, if they're cooked for an extended period of time, they will soften up. And because of that, they're allowed to be eaten even al yedei tzli in a gedi harach. Then the Gemara tells us that both Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish Lamaskana agree that any of the gidin that are soft now but will harden later as the animal matures are not considered basar and would not be able to be eaten as part of the basar of the Korban Pesach, and they also wouldn't be able to register people to be one of the menuyin on the korban based on feeding them those gidin. The Mishnah then tells us that if it says ve'etzem lo sishbru boy, so the Mishnah tells us that there's a chiyuv malchus if someone breaks the bone, if the meat is tahor. But if the meat is tameh, then there is no malchus for breaking the bone. The Mishnah also tells us that noisar, leaving over some of the meat, would not get you malchus, even though it says lo sisiru menu ad boiker. And the Gemara tells us the reason for it is either because it's a lavanitik lasei, because right after that it says ba'esh tisarif if there's any noisar. And the Gemara also says that one of the reasons why you wouldn't get malchus is because it's a lav shein by ma'isa. Leaving over noisar is not an action, it's an inaction, and you cannot get malchus for that. But the Gemara wants to know, why is it that if the meat is tameh, there's no malchus for etzem l'sishbru boy? The Gemara brings two svaris. Either because it says l'sishbru boy bekosher, only on a kosher animal, a kosher korban, will there be an iser of breaking a bone, or it's because at the beginning of the pasuk it says bebayis echa yechel, and then it says ve'etzem l'sishbru boy. So we learn only if it's roy la'achila would you get malchus for it. If the korban is tameh at the time, it's not roy la'achila. And the Gemara offers 8 differences lahalacha between if you darshan boy bekosher or mishum ein roy la'achila. The first difference that the Gemara offered was if this korban happens to be brought betuma because roiv klal yisrael is tameh and tuma dechuya, there would be an afkamina whether or not you're allowed to break the bone. Rabbi Yosef says that it would be an afkamina if there was a shasa kosher, meaning the korban was first kosher, you were eating from the korban and it was tahar, and suddenly it became tameh. This korban that shasa kosher, once again, there'd be a machlokes as to whether or not the iser of etzem l'shishbur boy applies to that case. Abaye said that the nafkamina would be if the bone was broken b'moy joim. We know the mitzvah of achilas korban pesach is only pesach by night. What if someone broke the bone erev pesach in the afternoon? That's where it would chap an nafkamina. The Gemara then gets into a question of whether or not you're allowed to break the bone b'moy joim, and the Gemara discusses a case where you took a coal to burn through a bone so you can extract the marrow to be eaten. Is that allowed to be done? The Gemara says that's not allowed to be done because there's a gzeira that either it might break the bone elsewhere or that it'll damage some of the marrow inside the bone, neither of which are allowed. And therefore, even though you might be able to break a bone midaraisa on Erev Pesach, but we wouldn't allow it because we're afraid if we let someone break the bone on Erev Pesach, they might also come to break a bone Mishech HaShecha at night, where it would be an Isur Daraisa. Rav Papa says that another nafkamina would be if the aver was partially stuck out of Yerushalayim. So that means part of the aver, the basar is tameh on, the basar is puzzle, and part of the aver, the basar is kosher. In such a case, there would also be a nafkamina as to whether or not you're allowed to cut the bone. Reb Sheshes has another nafkamina, and that is if it was raw. Before the animal was cooked, you're not allowed to eat it raw. Once again, there would be a nafkamina as to whether or not you're allowed to break the bone. And Reb Nachman says that a difference is if it's a bone that's not eaten, rather it's a bone that's put on the mizbeach, such as the tail of a kevis. Again, it would make a nafkamina. It is kosher, but it's not roy lachila because it's a part that goes on the mizbeach. Rabbi Ashi said that the nafkamina would be if you had a bone that doesn't have a kazayis basar on it, and Ravina said the nafkamina would be a bone that has a kazayis basar in one area, but in another area of the bone there's no kazayis basar. Would you be allowed to break the bone in that area? The Gemara then quotes a machlokes between Rebbe and Reish Lakish precisely in this case. You have a bone. In one area there's a kazayis, in the other area there's no kazayis. Are you allowed to break that bone? According to Rabbi Yochanan, you're not allowed to break that bone. And according to Reish Lakish, you are allowed to break that bone. Rabbi Yochanan wanted to bring a raya that you're not allowed to break the bone from a brisa that says whether there's a kazayis or not, you're still not allowed to break the bone. Reish Lakish says that's referring not to meat that's on the bone. What it's saying is even if there's no kazayis of meat on the bone, but there's a kazayis of marrow in the bone, you're still not allowed to break that bone.